Tonight, the King 5 investigators exposed a government contractor at Hanford that disregarded evidence that nuclear waste was leaking from an underground tank for nearly a year before investigating it.
And it's not just any tank. This is the one that holds the most deadly waste at the entire Hanford site near the Tri-Cities in eastern Washington. King 5 investigator Susannah Frame joins us now with the first report in her series, Hanford's Dirty Secrets.
Gina and Dennis, the contractor is based in Richland. It's called Washington River Protection Solutions, or WRPS. The federal government pays that company a lot of money to keep the public safe from millions of gallons of radioactive waste at Hanford. But we've found WRPS looked the other way when faced with scientific evidence that they had a major problem on their hands.
You're looking at one of the most scenic stretches of the Columbia River, undammed for 50 miles, a sanctuary for endangered wildlife, spawning salmon, and toxic waste. The country's most dangerous nuclear dump, just 200 miles away from Seattle.
Hanford is the most contaminated facility in the United States and one of the top 10 in the world.
In 1943, the federal government began producing plutonium at Hanford. The main goal? Fuel the world's first nuclear bomb during World War II. By the 1980s, all plutonium production stopped at the site, but the government left behind a mess. The largest and most complex environmental cleanup effort in the world, with the worst of it sitting underground in massive tanks. For 25 years and counting, the race has been on. Get rid of the lethal junk in the tanks before it leaks all the way to the Columbia.
And if anything bad happens out there, Seattle will feel it.
Tom Carpenter is executive director of the watchdog group Hanford Challenge, based in Seattle.
The Columbia River gets contaminated, it eventually finds its way up here. If there's an explosion or a fire, then it can still come up here that way. So we're not safe from it. And we need to keep our eye on what we're being told out there.
And last year, the U.S. Department of Energy told us something big. For the first time, one of their double shell tanks was leaking, found during a routine, regularly scheduled inspection of the tank known as AY-102. And they released these photos, radioactive and chemically lethal sludge oozing out of the main tank.
The fact that a double shell tank is leaking at the Hanford site is a game changer.
A major blow for sure. The double shells were supposed to be the toughest tanks around, the best shot at making sure the most deadly gunk wasn't going anywhere for decades.
It contains literally trillions and trillions of lethal doses of radiation in that waste.
Remember how the government told us they discovered this major problem during a routine inspection? That everyone was caught by surprise last year.
We found that's not true. The evidence shows the contractor in charge of the tanks, WRPS, headquartered here in Richland, ignored strong evidence the tank was leaking for nearly a year before doing anything about it.
We knew that we had a severe problem.
Mike Geffrey has worked at Hanford for 26 years. In 2011, he responded to an alarm on AY-102. Leak detection equipment sent up signals that waste was escaping from the tank, leaking into what's called the annulus, the space between the main tank and the outer shell.
I mean, we never guessed in a million years that we're going to have a double shell tank leak.
Geffrey and a coworker checked the equipment and saw this. Those white flakes in the middle of your screen, tiny signs of big trouble. What looked like nuclear waste dried up on the gear. Then, something from that part of the tank they'd never seen before, a reading of radioactive contamination.
It was very shocking for us, for both of us. We kind of just kept looking at each other like, wow, that's really hot.
At that moment, was there really any doubt in your mind that you had a leak?
Oh no, I knew right then that we had a leak, that something was wrong down there.
Geffrey reported the findings right away to his bosses, who had a different opinion. The detection equipment, not the tank, must be broken.
They just kind of sat there and they just kind of went, well, are you sure that thing's calibrated? And I said, yeah, I'm sure. I mean, I'm the one that does the calibrations on it. I'm the one that takes care of it. Of course I'm sure.
WRPS downplayed that first alarm. They reported to government officials that rainwater, not nuclear waste, most likely creeped onto that gear in the annulus. And the radioactive readings? They concluded it was simply leftover or legacy contamination from years ago. But King 5 found the company's own experts later discounted those explanations in a 400-page report. WRPS wrote the rainwater explanation seems problematic because of the radiation reading. And the legacy contamination theory, they wrote that area has been contamination-free since 1999.
Nothing added up that said this wasn't a problem. And they just chose not to do anything.
WRPS wouldn't go on camera, but issued a statement to King saying they didn't ignore anything, that they thoroughly evaluated events in 2011, and that experience gained over decades of tank farm operations led them to believe rainwater, not nuclear waste, was collecting in the annulus of AY-102.
If your alarm clock goes off, hey, it's time to go to work. If your alarm goes off for the tank, it's time to apparently wait another year.
Marco Kaltofen is a researcher near Boston. He's one of the top environmental radiation experts in the country. He says waiting to investigate signs of a leak is a serious mistake. The worst case, the most dangerous material on the planet makes its way all the way out of that tank.
Time is not our friend. This waste actually gets worse as time goes on. It's hot, it's corrosive, it eats through its container. It can't sit there, or it's going to be in the Columbia River, and there's no other choice.
The contractor says they assumed it was rainwater because it had been raining really hard in the Tri-Cities for several days before the alarm sounded. So how much has leaked so far? WRPS tells us up to 520 gallons had escaped last year and that there hasn't been any real or measurable change since then. But we've obtained records written by the Department of Ecology showing that's not true. They report the waste is measurable, that it's grown by 25% from what they recorded in December, and they continue to watch that leak because at this point there's no plan on what to do about it.
And you will continue.
Yes, on Thursday we're going to have another story that will focus on, it wasn't just this one red flag, this alarm that was kind of downplayed. We're going to show you it was a series of events over about a 10-month period that for some reason managers just kind of looked the other way.
Okay, look forward to it, Susannah. Thank you.
Thanks, Susannah.
Number 1 at 5. King 5 News starts now.
Good evening. Governor Jay Inslee and the federal government are both taking action now after a King 5 investigation into a Hanford contractor.
The investigators exposed the contractor looked the other way for nearly a year as evidence rolled in that, for the first time ever, a double shell tank was leaking nuclear waste. Susannah Frame is here with the latest in her series, Hanford's Dirty Secrets. Susannah.
All right, two big developments since we started asking tough questions about what is going on at Hanford. We've obtained a copy of a letter written by the top federal official who oversees the Hanford site. He's asking the contractor to conduct a full review of their management and practices in light of King's findings, and he wants the results in by August 1st. In addition, the governor's office is looking into how and why this happened.
We are going to be insistent that our federal partners be open and transparent with us to the extent humanly possible. So we are and will be reviewing what happened in this particular circumstance.
And coming up tonight on King 5 News at 11, more on our investigation, Hanford's Dirty Secrets. We'll show you the biggest red flags of all, warnings not taken seriously by the contractor that this tank was leaking.
Tonight, we take a look at the biggest red flags that popped up while the company looked the other way.
And we'll see how tense the situation got as one worker pushed his bosses to pay attention to those warnings. King 5 Susannah Frame is here with more on her investigation, Hanford's Dirty Secrets.
Well, Dennis and Lori, we've heard about other leaking tanks, so why is this one so important? This tank is holding waste that is so toxic that if it were to eat through its outer shell and reach the nearby Columbia River, it would contaminate irrigation water, crops, salmon, our food chain, not for months, but for hundreds of years to come.
This is one spot at Hanford the public is never allowed to go. Underfoot, the most hazardous material on Earth is brewing inside a 1 million-gallon double shell tank.
This tank is holding the nastiest of nasty stuff at Hanford.
A year and a half ago, Mike Geffrey, who works for a Hanford contractor, saw what no one expected, evidence that tank was leaking. If so, it would be the first double shell tank to ever leak at the site.
I knew it was serious because that's what my career has been for the last 25 years, is to monitor these tanks, to check for leaks. I mean, that's been what I've done.
Geffrey reported his findings to the top company guy in the field right away, WRPS manager Dave Strasser, who argued this wasn't serious, that rainwater, not nuclear waste, must have creeped into the space between the tank's inner and outer shells.
It was kind of just, we don't want to deal with it, Mike, you know, just let it go.
Shut up.
Just shut up, just let it go. Yeah, just don't worry about it.
But Geffrey did worry about it as warning after warning rolled in. A leak detection alarm went off. A few weeks later, an air monitor spiked to the highest reading of radioactivity ever seen by current employees. 5 months after that, equipment got stuck to the tank floor, an indicator it was glued to sticky waste.
I complained a lot about it. You know, I made a lot of statements of what are we going to do?
After all that, the employees here at Hanford came across the biggest red flag of all, something the experts say should have sent their managers scrambling to find answers.
A broken wire, similar to this one behind the glass, was pulled out of the space between the shells. It gave off an extremely hot radiation reading, one that shocked the workers, but not the managers. They didn't call for more investigation. Instead, they kept to their rainwater theory.
It's hard to believe that you could get this much advance warning of a problem and not deal with it.
Marco Kaltofen is a top radiation expert located in Massachusetts. He's been to Hanford many times.
I really don't know what it's going to take. What is it going to take to get you to wake up and start dealing with a problem? Because problems do not fix themselves, and they definitely don't fix themselves at Hanford.
WRPS, the contractor hired by the feds to take care of all the tanks at Hanford, denied repeated requests for an on-camera interview, but they told us their experts disagree.
They said contamination readings were well below what would have been expected from tank waste, and that the alleged red flags were investigated and determined unlikely to be caused by a leak. Months went by.
Yeah.
And what happened?
Well, nothing.
Geffrey says his WRPS bosses told him to conduct business as usual, but that didn't happen.
Yeah, I'd come home and be just frustrated and grumpy, couldn't sleep at nights.
He even considered ditching his long and successful career.
They took the fun out of it. This company took the fun out of my job. Just didn't enjoy it anymore. You know, it's hard to go to work and to fight so hard to do the right thing.
But Geffrey stayed on the job and was there to see this. Photos of not rainwater, but nuclear sludge oozing into the space. The pictures were taken during a routine inspection nearly a year after managers dismissed his first warnings.
What I was doing was right, you know, and it validated that I was doing the right thing by calibrating the stuff and sticking with it, and that it actually worked, and it detected the leak, and there was a leak there.
One of the reasons this whistleblower, Mike Geffrey, is so emotional is because he understands what's at stake, that it's a race against time. Do something about that leaking tank before the sludge makes its way into the groundwater and the Columbia River. So waiting, he believes, put them a year behind trying to work on a solution.
If a fire alarm goes off at your office or school, there's most likely a plan for what to do next.
But that wasn't the case when a serious alarm sounded at Hanford a year and a half ago. In her continuing investigation, Hanford's Dirty Secrets, King 5's Susannah Frame reports that a government contractor had no plan in place when an alarm went off, signaling a double-shell tank was leaking nuclear waste.
With human and environmental health on the line, nobody shoots from the hip at Hanford. Written procedures dictate everything. What protective gear to wear, when and where to put it on, how to calibrate every instrument. And some of the most important ones are called alarm response procedures, or ARPs. When an alarm bell goes off, that's the go-to Bible.
We have alarm response procedures for everything out there.
As it turns out, not everything. Check out this logbook obtained by King. On October 9th, 2011, a shift manager wrote the double-shell tank called AY-102 sent an alarm that it was leaking, but he didn't know what to do. He was unable to find an ARP. After that, managers for the government contractor, WRPS, sent their employee Mike Geffrey out to check the detector.
I thought there would be a whole protocol of investigating, looking to figure out what's going on, maybe sticking cameras in and looking to see where the waste was coming from. I just assumed that was in place. Well, there wasn't any of that in place. There was nothing.
No plan.
No plan. Zippo.
WRPS officials disagree with King 5. They sent us a statement saying there is and has been an established alarm response procedure, ARP, for this leak detection system. We checked. We looked at all of the ARPs connected with double shell tanks at Hanford. They've got one for high pressure, power supply failure, tank level alarms, and more. But nothing, not one ARP for alarms showing nuclear waste might be leaking from a primary tank.
To me, they failed. You know, that company failed.
We showed the company response to former Ecology Department worker Dick Hagan that there is and has been an alarm response plan.
But did they give you the actual procedure?
No, because it doesn't exist.
They lied to you then.
For 9 years, it was Hagan's job to make sure contractors followed state regulations at Hanford.
They need to, right now, figure out a plan to deal with this in case it gets bigger or something else leaks.
Somebody decided not to have a procedure in place because they simply believed it would never happen, they'd never have to address it. That was a big mistake.
Why was this such a big mistake? Without a plan, a roadmap to investigate what exactly set off the alarm, the company simply reported to the government that rainwater most likely got into the space and left it at that. The assumption was wrong. It wasn't water, but nuclear waste leaking out of the primary tank. The first time this had ever happened at Hanford.
If you are alarming that, if you're testing that, if you're monitoring, and you don't have a plan for when you find something, why are we out there in the first place? Everybody go home. Forget the whole thing.
With no procedures in place, warnings of a leak rolled in as waste rolled out for nearly a year of not working on a solution. And Hanford experts tell us this leaking tank in particular needs a solution quickly. It's loaded with massive amounts of a nuclear byproduct called strontium-90. Strontium-90 is so nasty, it creates thermal heat at the bottom of the tank so hot, it boils the waste around it. A concoction that would eat through the tank's outer shell faster than any other material at Hanford. And that's the final barrier between the toxic sludge and the environment.
And it's been known for over 50 years at Hanford that high heat loads at the bottom of tanks cause them to leak and crack. This is not unknown.
They've wasted money, they've wasted time. We can't afford to do those things out at Hanford. It's too urgent of a problem. All of us have way too much invested in that cleanup to succeed for that kind of mentality to prevail.
So today, a WRPS executive told us he needed to clarify their statement that they didn't actually need an alarm response procedure, an ARP, because they had other plans that covered it. In fact, the company didn't have proper plans in place at the time, and they still don't. And this is important because this is not the only double shell tank at Hanford. That company is in charge of 27 others filled with the worst waste out there. And our experts are telling us that because of that, they need an actual ARP on the books in a hurry in case it happens again.
Tonight, the King 5 investigators exposed that Hanford executives misled public officials and citizens alike about leaking nuclear waste for several months last year. In her continuing investigation, Hanford's Dirty Secrets, Susannah Frame reveals the danger of an important tank at the site was concealed during meetings for the public and policymakers.
With all the uncertainties at Hanford, what's buried below this dirt was supposed to be the one slam dunk. 28 sturdy double shell tanks. If all else failed, at least these would protect the Columbia River, the food chain, and people from the worst of the worst on the planet. With 2 steel walls, not one like the older tanks, the added safety barrier would contain that nuclear waste until scientists figured out a way to get rid of it for good. But that plan fell apart.
The failure of a double shell tank is big, big news.
The citizen watchdog group Hanford Challenge shocked the public last summer with information from a Hanford insider. Their press release read, "First double shell tank leaks at Hanford." A massive blow to the entire cleanup operation.
And the reason is that we are relying on these tanks to operate safely for 40, 50 years through the rest of the cleanup.
Now the public wanted to know what's going on.
Board members and alternates,
Especially the 32 members of the Hanford Advisory Board, citizens, government officials, and scientists.
Secondly, another suggestion is
It's their job to give sound advice to the feds and the state of Washington on how to solve problems at the site.
But it seems like I'm getting quite mixed messages.
The board had questions, and Tom Fletcher, a U.S. Department of Energy Hanford manager, was supposed to be the man with the answers. At a board meeting last September, Fletcher brought photos of mysterious material that had made its way into that safety space between the two walls of the tank, known as AY-102. But Fletcher told the policy advisors he didn't know what it was yet.
They were saying, well, don't jump to conclusions, it's just a possible leak.
Meredith Crafton and Tom Carpenter of Hanford Challenge both attended the September meeting.
The overall presentation was we're looking, but we don't see any evidence yet.
Don't worry.
Don't worry.
Representative Jerry Paulette was there as well.
And their answer was, we're investigating it, but we think that it's likely that it's rainwater.
Here's an audio recording of a portion of Fletcher's presentation.
It could be a carbonate buildup.
yes.
And that's a possibility. It's just, like I said, we've seen a lot of different things, and they just don't point to any one thing, and that's why I'm really hard to speculate what it is. We haven't got to a point that says, hey, we know what it is. We know there is a history of rainwater leakage in this tank, annulus.
We found those explanations don't add up. A month before that meeting, with all the speculation of rainwater, a tiny piece of duct tape, something similar to this, told a different story. This is duct tape employees from the government contractor in charge of the tanks, WRPS, lowered into the safety space of AY-102 to grab a sample of whatever was down there. And boy, did that tape deliver. Internal emails obtained by King 5 show that on August 13th, weeks before the board briefing, the lab reported to company execs what they'd found. Flakes of rust, old paint, and something else. Some of the most dangerous nuclear byproducts known to man, strontium-90, plutonium, cesium-137, and more. The exact components of AY-102's primary tank.
After they analyzed the duct tape, should there have been a lingering question, is the tank leaking or not?
Via Skype, we shared the findings with our radiation expert, Marco Kaltofen of Boston.
I don't know what they were waiting for. Did they need a fax from the president saying, okay, this is a leak? It was time. All the information was there to make the right decision.
Enough was on that tape.
Absolutely.
The tape held one more important clue. It was screaming hot with radioactivity. And remember, the sample came from the safety space that shouldn't record any contamination at all.
That's a huge number. You actually have to go out and look hard for equipment that can measure radiation that's that high. You had all the information you needed. You knew you had a leak. And now it was just time to fess up, face the music.
We wanted to ask WRPS President Mike Johnson about that and more. He repeatedly denied our request for an on-camera interview.
Hi, Mr. Johnson. I'm Susannah Frame from King TV. We've talked on the phone before. We're here to talk about tank AY-102. Can you tell us why the public was misled for several months last year?
We caught up with Johnson outside the WRPS offices in Richland.
I think we have some important questions that our viewers deserve to have answered.
Johnson didn't answer our questions, but members of the Hanford Advisory Board did when we told them about the tape and lab results dated in August, a month before their briefing.
If they're going to say, just dismiss the evidence, the obvious evidence in front of them and not even tell us about that evidence, then how can we rely on them for anything?
And I think it can put the public at risk and workers at risk when they're not forthcoming with information, also meaning they're not forthcoming with responding to issues and creating solutions.
This was a very deliberate cover-up, and I will use the word that we were lied to. There's no two ways about it. We were lied to.
Now, it wasn't just WRPS President Mike Johnson who wouldn't answer our questions about this issue. The Department of Energy, which put on the presentation for that advisory board, wouldn't answer any questions about the tape, the lab results, and the delay in telling the public what was really going on. And one of the reasons the advisory board members are so upset about this when we showed them the evidence is that they said that they need real-time, up-to-date information because it's their job to give advice. I mean, the government agencies are mandated to take advice from this great, scientific panel, and just didn't work out that way.
Tonight, the King 5 investigators follow the money trail in their continuing investigation, Hanford's dirty secrets.
During a time when Hanford workers are facing furloughs and layoffs, Susannah Frame exposes one of the government's prime contractors wasted millions on the broken tank at the center of our investigation.
This massive construction project will eventually be the last stop for nuclear sludge in Washington state, Hanford's waste treatment plant. The goal? Turn the dangerous liquids into glass logs at the plant, then ship it out of here for good. But now there's a major snag. Years ago, the feds chose one tank, AY-102, to serve as the first tank to ship waste to the treatment plant, a way to stage and feed millions of gallons of nuclear byproducts from underground holding tanks over to its final resting place. But that plan's now shot. With AY-102 confirmed to be leaking, it's deemed broken and unfit to handle the job.
How big of a setback is that?
Oh, it's huge.
Hanford worker Mike Geffrey discovered the leak in 2011, but the contractor he works for, WRPS, looked the other way for nearly a year and instead charged ahead with Plan A, spending money to ready AY-102 as their key tank waste feeder.
We wasted a year of designing. We wasted a year of where we could have been all of a sudden looking at another tank.
During the exact months WRPS discounted signs of the leak, the company spent millions on waste feed design work, equipment, and project management. Most of it wasted work hours and tax dollars.
We don't have a dime to waste at Hanford.
Teresa Labriola of the citizen group Columbia Riverkeeper has seen budgets shrink at Hanford for projects like cleaning up contaminated groundwater that's headed toward the river.
Again, this undermines the public's confidence in cleanup. When they hear about waste, they wonder what's going on at Hanford.
While leak evidence was ignored, how much did the Fed spend on a broken tank? The U.S. Department of Energy gives us this figure, $2.4 million. But we found that number's way off, 600% off. In a report obtained by King, written by their contractor, WRPS, the number's a whopping $14.2 million. $14 million for work, a lot of it already scrapped. Millions of that could have been saved if they'd listened to science and their own people when the first signs of a leak cropped up a year before all that spending.
Nothing added up that said this wasn't a problem. And they just chose not to do anything.
The right opportunities for those projects that exist that get funded.
At a public meeting in Richland, we caught up with federal Hanford official Tom Fletcher after we were denied requests to talk to him about the money and more.
I'm Susannah Frame from King TV, and we've been trying to get... Are you really not going to answer any of our questions?
We're actually on our way to another meeting right now, so like we told you before, give us a call. We'll talk to you.
We've asked actually for several months for the Department of Energy to give an interview.
We're very busy.
Mr. Fletcher, we just want a few minutes of your time since you are a very high-ranking official with the Department of Energy. Can you tell us why the Department of Energy has not been able to take 15 minutes to speak to King TV?
Actually, Susannah, again, give me a call when I'm not on
I've called you, I've emailed, and we've been ignored, actually.
There's something else we hope to talk to the government about. King 5 has found that even after the leak was confirmed to the public last year, their contractor kept at it, spending on the defunct project. An assessment team wrote in a report that stopping the job should have been implied or evident. The Department of Energy sent their contractor 2 letters directing them to ramp down and pause the work and then to stop the design development altogether because this plan was no longer feasible.
It's alarming, it's concerning. We hear year after year about budgets shrinking.
Hanford Advisory Board member Dan Saris and others with the same goal, to clean up the most contaminated site in the country, say there's no time and no money to waste.
Every dime that's wasted is money that should be spent on successful cleanup operations. The cleanup is too big and too important to be wasting even a dime.
The U.S. Department of Energy is sticking to its guns, saying the figure they gave us, $2.4 million, is right on, and that somehow the reports we've obtained are off base. We asked for proof, but as of this hour, we're still waiting. We haven't received anything yet, but we'll let you know. River Protection Solutions, or WRPS. The federal government pays that company a lot of money to keep the public safe from millions of gallons of radioactive waste at Hanford. But we've found WRPS looked the other way when faced with scientific evidence that they had a major problem on their hands.
You're looking at one of the most scenic stretches of the Columbia River, undammed for 50 miles, a sanctuary for endangered wildlife, spawning salmon, and toxic waste. The country's most dangerous race has been on. Get rid of the lethal junk in the tanks before it leaks all the way to the Columbia.
And if anything bad happens out there, Seattle will feel it.
Tom Carpenter is executive director of the watchdog group Hanford Challenge, based in Seattle.
The Columbia River gets contaminated, it eventually finds its way up here. If there's an explosion or a fire, then it can still come up here that way. So we're not safe from it. And we need to keep our eye on what we're being told out there.
And last year, the U.S. Department of Energy told us something big. For the first
Tonight, the King 5 investigators exposed a government contractor at Hanford that disregarded evidence that nuclear waste was leaking from an underground tank for nearly a year before investigating it.
And it's not just any tank. This is the one that holds the most deadly waste at the entire Hanford site near the Tri-Cities in eastern Washington. King 5 investigator Susannah Frame joins us now with the first report in her series, Hanford's Dirty Secrets.
Jan and Dennis, the contractor is based in Richland. It's called Washington.
First time one of their double shell tanks was leaking, found during a routine, regularly scheduled inspection of the tank known as AY-102. And they released these photos, radioactive and chemically lethal sludge oozing out of the main tank.
The fact that a double shell tank is leaking at the Hanford site is a game changer.
A major blow for sure. The double shells were supposed to be the toughest tanks around, the best shot at making sure the most deadly gunk wasn't going anywhere for decades.
It contains literally trillions and trillions.
Nuclear dump, just 200 miles away from Seattle.
Hanford is the most contaminated facility in the United States and one of the top 10 in the world.
In 1943, the federal government began producing plutonium at Hanford. The main goal? Fuel the world's first nuclear bomb during World War II. By the 1980s, all plutonium production stopped at the site, but the government left behind a mess. The largest and most complex environmental cleanup effort in the world, with the worst of it sitting underground in massive tanks. For 25 years and counting, the